Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is a very special presentation. What we're doing today is we are talking about Jung's cognitive functions, but we're doing it in a different way. This is a new way that I've thought of, inspired by Bucky, of thinking about Jung's cognitive functions. And I'm actually making this presentation to my friends Rohit and Rupali, who are sitting right there. Hi there. And I am going to be going back and forth. This is going to be a very easygoing back and forth kind of a presentation. So first I want to talk about the motivation of doing that. As you know, Carl Jung talked about the four cognitive functions. There is sensing, which is represented by green. There is feeling, which is essentially valuing, which is represented by red here. There is thinking, which is about organizing your thoughts, and that is represented by blue. And there is intuition, that is represented here by yellow. Now, Carl Jung is a profoundly integrative thinker. So he looked at all these four functions as being part of one whole, which he called the self. He did not look at these functions as being dissociated from one another. He said everybody has all these functions, and the process of individuation consists of developing all these functions over a lifetime. It is true that we lead off our lives with certain functions. The first function he calls the dominant function. That function is a function that you end up using a lot. You get good at using it, you become skillful at using it, you enjoy using it, it is effective, there is a feedback loop, so you keep doing it more and more, you become stronger and stronger at it. When you use it, it adds to your energy. That's the dominant function, or the first function. Then there is the second function, which he calls, you can think of it as a parent function. The first function is the hero function. That is your go-to function. The second function is the navigating function, which is your parent function. The third function is something which is not fully developed, but you actually like it a lot. That's your child function. And the fourth function is your anima function, which completes you. These are the four functions. I'm just talking in terms of just four functions here, not the entire 8 functions, just for the sake of simplicity here. Okay. Now, why use a tetrahedron for thinking about these things? At 52 Living Ideas, we went through Bhagavad Gita, Gospel of John, and Tao Te Ching. These are all works done during the axial age, or scribal age, more precisely the scribal age, where writing had come to be, but printing was not yet. And if you look at all these works are integrative works. They look at this deep intuition about nature, about God, about universal principles. That is over here. The thoughts are connected to that. So is devotion, the emotional valuing, and actions, moral action, is shaped by that. So all these four things occur together for these people. So though in modern times things are much more split up, so what we are trying to do here is that to think of all these four things together, and this is an attempt. This tool, the tetrahedron tool, is an attempt to do that. Now, why a tetrahedron? And this is inspired by Buckminster Fuller. Tetrahedron is the simplest three-dimensional object. And you can actually build up like larger sets of tetrahedrons, multiple tetrahedrons put together to create a lattice. But more importantly, in 3D, you cannot forget the fact that this is one thing and that this is just one side of the thing, that you're looking at it from one side. So you keep coming back to the integration of these four functions. You never lose it. So that's why I find these tetrahedrons to be useful. I've done presentations, I've talked about doing diagrams of these four functions using 2D diagrams. This is moving from 2D to 3D. And I think it is extremely useful. So I'm going to have a conversation with Rupali and Rohit about this approach to things. So first, you can look at these four colors. So yellow is intuition, blue is thinking, red is feeling or valuing, and green is sensing or action. Okay. Now, when you look at personality, I mean, the way in which Jung thinks about it is that suppose you have this as your first function. You have a second function. You always read it in this system from left to right. So this is your first function, which is intuition, and this is your guiding function, which is thinking. And you can use this to say, okay, this is your third function, which is feeling, and this is your fourth function, which is sensing or action. So you can see here the size or the number of triangles here actually indicate the strength of the functions. So there's a 9 over here for the dominant function. There are 5 for the second function, 3 for the third function, and just 1 for the fourth function. And this is how Carl Jung looks at people in terms of strengths of functions. But he never forgets that everybody has all these functions together. So I've been talking to Rupali and Rohit about it. So let me get them in the conversation, and we will go step by step through it. So Rupali, what do you think about this idea of moving? You're familiar with the 2D diagrams I've had about these functions. What do you think is the advantage of moving from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions? Now, just for people who don't know, Rupali is an architect, so she thinks in 3D. So please let me know, what do you think?
To me, the first thing is that it's very concrete. Mm-hmm. 2-dimensional is flat, whereas this gives you the ability to change the numbers of triangles also. It is a very stable form, and you can see that. You can say, okay, for a person to be in complete integration, this is how it would look like. That's the symbol. Whereas in 2-dimensional, it's flat. You don't see that. Mm-hmm. So I really like this 3-dimensional model.
Wonderful. Rohit, do you have any comments about the 2D versus 3D? I know you're not as familiar with this, but if you have any comments, you're welcome.
No, I think this is, first of all, it is concrete, and second, when you have 2 of these together, then you can kind of juxtapose. You've got 4 over there, so you can actually work with 4 different facets, if you will, or 4 different functions. Or you could say, I want to represent 4 different individuals with their functions, or maybe an organization with a function, and just compare them. So it kind of helps you in that way as well, which is kind of tricky to do with a 2-dimensional. You'll have to draw 4 different things.
Wonderful. So that's a great point, Rohit. So let's take these 2 things off camera here and just look at these 2 and look at them in terms of interaction. I have 2 friends who are good business partners as well, and I talk to them about their functions. Again, they are not very familiar with these functions, but we just had a conversation about them. And it was very interesting. One of them, these are the two primary functions. This is the first function, and this is his second function. This is friend number one. Friend number two is like this. So this friend's first function is thinking, and the second function is intuition. The second friend, his first function is feeling or valuing, and the second function is intuition. So how does the interaction work? Okay, now again, I have not studied this in great amount of detail. I've not tried to kind of put together a study here. This is something that this tool I'm just developing, and I'm just beginning to think about it. But just from this is an anecdotal example, but I think it points to something. Now, what happens with this? So the way in which Carl Jung would say is that this is the hero function, go-to function, thinking function of this first person, and this is the feeling function or valuing function. This is about holding deep values, having a personal commitment to certain values and focusing on those values, feeling very strongly about it. Now, the second function is the navigating function or the guiding function, and that is what they have in common. So both of them are trying to have a vision of what they are trying to do, as well as they are continuously trying to explore all the possibilities of what they can do, going back and forth. And that's where their intuition comes in. And because they have that in common, they have that as a common base, common knowledge, common skills that both of them are using. And one of them comes at it to make sure that it is fully aligned with their values at the most minute level. And one of them comes at it saying that everything has been meticulously thought out and planned. So their working together is far more effective because they complement each other's weaknesses. So talking about weaknesses, what happens is that the function stack for this person is going to be like this, and function stack for this person is going to be like this. So first thing that is happening is that for each of them, their anima, the weakest of the functions, is being supported by the strong function of the other person. So that is one thing. So, this person's valuing or feeling is being supported by this person's very strong approach to it, and vice versa. This person's relative weakness at thinking is being supported by the relative strength of this. So it is a way of complementing. The complementing is much greater. The third thing is that this third function is called the child function, which is also the same for both. And the child function is function that is not fully developed as strong as the primary function, but it is something that you really like and value. So it is like your child, and that gives a lot of joy to both parties, and that is what they have in common. So they not only have the navigating function in common, but their child function in common. Therefore, the interaction is really, really good. Now, the background for all of this is that you have to respect human beings, individual human beings, regardless of the differences. Because that basic respect for human beings means that you're not going to be singularly focused on things that you are strong at. And you're not going to deprecate people who are weak at those things. You are your approach is that all these four functions are natural functions. Some people are stronger at one than the other, and you need to figure out a way of working together with that deep respect. And what is that? What is the root of that deep respect? It is that it is one, that these are all parts of human abilities. They all have to work together. And because we are not equally strong in all of them, it makes sense to work with other people, because together we can do a lot more than what we could do by ourselves. So that is the point about the communication. All right. So that was the second point I wanted to make about communication. And Rohit, thank you for bringing that out. Really useful. So that is the second point. Now let's go back to this. Now, Rupali, are there any topics that you would like to raise at this point?
So, to me, this is very fascinating
Mm-hmm.
because as I was playing with the tetrahedrons, I realized that you can have your primary function, your secondary function, and then what I found on the third surface was where my weaknesses were.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, this is great because I can look at what I have strength in, and then I can look at the third surface and say, what are the areas I need to work on? So that was an accidental discovery for me, but I was really thrilled to see that.
Wonderful. That's a great point. So the point here is that what happens is that these first two functions that we have, we focus on them a lot. They are in our foreground. But the other functions, they are functions in the background. Like, for example, the fourth function is in the background. And we are not as aware of it, as often aware of it. We tend to ignore it because the way in which the dynamics of this function work is that if you're focused on one thing, like for example, if you're focused on intuition, if you're trying to intuit, if you're trying to see all the possibilities that there are, or if you're trying to say, okay, what is the vision that brings everything together, you cannot at the same time be focused on acting right now. You have to integrate it separately. So at the same time, if you're focusing a lot on one of them, one of the functions is less focused on. Another example of that is that if you're focused on your thinking, then to that extent, while you're carefully trying to logically, step by step, look at connections, you're not as aware of the value implications. And so you have to shuttle between those things. What this three-dimensional model allows you to do is to never forget that even when you're focused on, let's say, these three things, that there is this in the background. And if you're focused on these three things, then there is this in the background. And it's all there, and you can look at it, you can focus on different things. So it says that all of these are just different perspectives, and you are capable of changing the perspectives. Again, Carl Jung is very big on this. He thinks that individuation, especially in later part of life, consists of integrating into your personality these functions which earlier you did not have strong. Also working with other people who are strong at those things, whether as business associates, whether as parts of families, you actually develop strengths where previously those things were weak. But this, make sure that you are aware of all these functions at the same time. So that was another point. Great point. Thank you. Let's see. Now there are multiple directions we can take from here. Now this fourfold path, we're talking about Carl Jung's ideas, but there are many people, many systems of thought have talked about this. which roughly map onto this. Yasuhiko did a presentation on the Fourfold Vision, where he talks about William Blake and his ideas of these four, what William Blake calls Fourfold Vision. And he regards this yellow, the intuition, as being the deepest of all of these. Most people are focused on these three things. They're focused on their actions, they're focused on their thoughts, and they're focused on their emotions. And the point that William Blake makes is that it is this intuition, or what he calls imagination, is the background, is the ground from which on which all of these rest, and it allows you to operate at a much higher level if you integrate all these four things, integrate intuition into all of these things. Bhagavad Gita talks about 4 different yogas. This is the yoga of action, which is called Karma Yoga. This is the yoga of devotion, which is called Bhakti Yoga. This is the yoga of knowledge, which is called Jnana Yoga. This is self-knowledge. And this is the yoga of concentration on the deepest principle, or the Brahma, which is intuition. So which is called Dhyana Yoga, or intuition. So all of these kind of map into each other. If you want to map it into the Gospel of John, this is God the Father, the source of light, which is not directly accessible to you. This is the Word, the Christ, who is the intermediary, who actually makes it accessible to you. And this is the world, this is, physical world in which you are acting. And this is the love that you have, the love commandment that we are studying now in the Gospel of John, chapter 13. That's your love for the universal principle, or God, which brings it all together. And you have to have all of these things acting within you. So this is another way. You can see that this fourfold way of thinking is not just about Jung's ideas. Jung was profoundly influenced by the Indian ideas. So those are there. You can see the Indian ideas. You can see the ideas in Gospel of John. So this is a very large base. Now you can look at kind of communication problems. You can look at what your challenges are. So for example, like the other thing is that I want to point out that the way in which I think about this is far more flexible. That it's not, firstly, it's not cast, none of this is cast in stone. This is just your current measurement of things. You have capacity to change. Also, when you move from one context to another, the functions that you lead with at work, for example, are slightly different than the way in what you lead with at home. What functions are used also depends on the functions of other people that you are interacting with. So it is a more complex thing than just that these are the functions in this order. Also, there are patterns where there are certain ways where you can go wrong, and there are patterns in which you can go wrong. So you can think about that. So when I make a mistake, I end up doing this, that I jump directly from an intuition into action without actually thinking it out, and you kind of ignore your negative emotions that you're getting from other people or yourself. So that is an example of how you can see what is going on. This is another way of, the purpose of a model is to increase your self-awareness. All models are limited, and they have their tremendous uses, but they are all maps. Territory, you can't confuse map with territory. You have to be focused on yourself, and you use these as tools to understand yourself. It is a way of measuring yourself, but it's like drawing a map. But once you draw a map, you cannot say that, okay, that is territory. You still have to keep your eye on the territory. So that's, these are some of the things I wanted to bring up in this. So now I'm open to any questions that you may have. Rupali, do you have any questions?
How did you come up with the tetrahedron itself?
It's very simple. I kind of naturally am taking in a lot of ideas. These basic ideas of Carl Jung have been with me for a long time, and I have tried to take it and I've tried to apply it to different things. I've seen the correspondence between that and the Indian thought, for example, the different yogs. That I had already done, but I like drawing things, and I've always drawn it as as 4 quadrants, or 4 things on a flat surface. Moving to 3D was really inspired by Buckminster Fuller, and their world is 3D. World is 3D, reality is 3D, and 2D is a powerful way of creating a map of the 3D. This moment I kind of came up with this, I started, actually I have to tell you, I have to show you something here. I actually started out with these here. Let me show it to you. These are D4 dice that are used in games. I started out with this, and I actually like these also very much, because what it does is that when you're holding this, there is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I assign numbers to them. 1 is intuition, 2 is thinking, 3 is feeling, and 4 is sensing. And whenever you have this dice pointed at you like this, it's difficult to see, but I encourage you to have, actually use either this one yourself in your hand, or this one, and preferably both. When you're focused on one of them, on 1, 2, 3, 4 are visible to you at the same time. And you can turn and you can say, okay, now I'm focused on 4, but 1, 2, 3 are visible to you. I'm using the same colors here. Again, this is the same order here from left to right. And I found that playing around with this thing, okay, so what am I doing first? I'm doing this first, and then I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this. Whereas this other person is approaching it in a different order. And how do I talk to them? So I started out with these. The other thing I find very useful is that this is tactile, that you can manipulate it. Just like on a written piece of paper, you can rub things out. Pencil is a crucial part of writing. And then you can, but this, and then you can, redraw this. This allows you to move it in your hand. The fact that you can turn this and see different combinations, that was an added bonus. And I really thought that was very useful, because you can see, you can represent not only the 4 functions, but even the hierarchy, the order in which a person is thinking about this. So for example, when I did another presentation today on Buckminster Fuller and how we are planning to study Buckminster Fuller, I ended up using these as way of describing to people what Bucky is like and what our 52 living ideas are like. And how do you get somebody who is really expert in this, who is focused on mostly ideas of Bucky, to relate effectively to the audience? What are the issues, and what kind of program that you need to construct in order to do that? So for example, let me give it to you in short. So Bucky, he is very deep on intuition. He takes these deep intuitions and then thinks them through very, very carefully. He really cares about the world and people. He values them. And all his implementations are based on all of these. So he brings all of it together. He's a very integrated human being, like Leonardo da Vinci or Louis Sullivan. So that's what Bucky is like. Our 52 living ideas is, we are all looking for deep insights, deep integrations. We are committed to the community, the camaraderie of people. We love ideas, and that's what we are focused on. And we are weakest on implementation of ideas, because this is really left to individual people to go and do, because we are using Zoom as the medium. So that is what we are doing over here. Many of the Bucky experts, they do not have the same level of insight that Bucky has. Very few people in the world do. But they have the ideas very clearly explicated, and they're able to apply it. And then they have some emotion in this. So this is where many of the Bucky experts are. So how do you make people, how do you take these people and make it possible for them to talk to these people really effectively? So we came up with a plan. It's me, Joe, Maritza, Rupali, and CJ. The Bucky Meetups is the idea of CJ Fernley. And what we did was that we said that we wanted to do all these 4 things. These are weekly meetups. Each week we would do different things, and they will build up this integrated picture over time for everybody. They will provide different pathways, different routes to Bucky's ideas, Bucky's way of thinking. We would have this camaraderie of actually sharing Bucky's ideas and conversation between people. We would have study of Bucky himself. We're taking a book by him, Critical Path, going through that, trying to connect to his own insights, each of us. We have the Bucky experts presenting on Bucky's ideas, and we've got people who have implemented Bucky's ideas in physical world, doing show and tell, so people can actually see it. So this is an example of how we can use these ideas in order to plan things. Again, I'm just getting started here, so this is a very quick example, but I wanted to give that as an example of how do you use these things. Any other questions?
So, one thing that I realize is how people can interact. And in group dynamics, especially in my case, I work with adults and children, I feel that people can talk about themselves using these models, and they can say, this is the kind of person I am, and I can work in this manner, whereas somebody else may be leading with thinking or emotions, and it gives a very concrete tool for groups to talk about how they interact with each other and what their strengths are and how they can complement each other.
Absolutely. That is one of the things. When people used to ask me, what do I find useful about Jung's cognitive functions, and I would always say there are 2 things. One is that it gives you a measure. It gives you a way of measuring yourself and increasing your self-awareness of what exactly you're doing and what exactly you're not doing. That's one thing. The second thing is that you start to understand that other people can operate differently because it is natural for us human beings to just think that the other person operates exactly the same way as you do. By knowing this, you understand, you can say, okay, where is this person coming from? And that is a start. Understanding is a start of building a good interaction. So absolutely.
Also, I think, it allows everybody to say, these 4 functions exist in all of us. In that way, we are all similar. We may be dominant with one function or maybe have a secondary function, but it allows us to have tolerance when we interact with each other. And I don't know if this is the goal, like if you're looking at Bhagavad Gita or Buckminster Fuller or Louis Sullivan, they're talking about an integrated being, and whether this allows us to reflect. It can be a device to reflect and say, oh, where am I on my journey, and how can I get better at, my secondary function, or as I said, the 4th plane where your deficiencies are. And yes, you can't see them, but they exist. So I wonder if this could be a tool for self-reflection.
Absolutely. Rohit, what about you? Do you have any questions?
No, I'm very interested in application of these ideas. I think that is a very crucial. But I guess there's a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of see how to apply these ideas. But at the very least, like what you said, the 2 things, right? Measure yourself and at least realize that somebody else is starting from a different point. If you come down the path, if you recognize where they're starting from and you kind of change your approach to make it work better, I think that's fantastic. But there's a lot of work that is required to get to that point.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So this is the Tetrahedral. So let's see what we can do with it. We're just beginning, and let's see what we can do with it. All right, thank you very much. Bye.